Parents who have disowned or genuinely stopped loving your child, what happened?
My siblings and I have stopped interacting with my oldest brother. We found out that years earlier he had molested at least 2 boys. He was an adult at the time. He showed no remorse, and turned the story around to say that those boys were at fault. It was so disgusting to watch someone you grew up with treat people so poorly and show such a blatant disregard for others. The good news is that the remaining 4 siblings have become closer and we now are able to appreciate the good we see in each other. It's true when they say that if you could pick your family it would look much different than it is.
My mother and her sister were both adopted into a great family. Recently, my grandfather fell ill and we were told to prepare to say goodbye. So the family gathered. My grandmother has had a hard time with her memory since she had a brain hemorrhage, but she welcomed my aunt into her home during this tough time. Whilst my grandfather was in his final week, Wendy, aunt, took my grandmother's ATM card and proceeded to spend well over $1,000 on herself and get herself a motel room. She also attempted to steal their car. When my uncles found out, she basically disappeared into the wind. After my grandfather passed and his funeral was all sorted, my grandmother went to an attorney to write Wendy out of any inheritance she would get from their estate when she passes. She didn't press any formal charges, because the whole process would have been lengthy and more painful for her. She didn't need the extra stress. I'm pretty sure one of my uncles also threatened Wendy to make sure she stayed away from my grandmother from now on too.
My parents didn't disown me. I was just a weird mistake. My mother never wanted a child. She bailed after a few months. My father was a single parent and ended up in prison, life without parole, when I was 14. I finally met my mother. She was a police detective by the time I moved in with her. She threw me out after 2 months. I am 30 now, and life is typically a little weird around the holidays, but I always get a good laugh when I tell people that my father is in prison for life and my mother is a cop. But then they get super awkward when I tell them that no. It's not a joke. It took a long time for me to come to terms with it. But I know now that none of it was my fault. Edit. This blew up way more than I expected. Thanks for all the kind words, everybody.
I love my son, but he abused me. When he turned that violence onto his sister by choking her, I had to say goodbye. My father said my mother's issue was she had too many children and it gave her some kind of brain fever, much like a dog that loses its mind after having too many puppies. My mother said my father felt trapped by me. He was planning to leave when it was just my 2 older brother and then my mother got pregnant with me and he felt obligated to stay. Now that I'm an adult with 2 kids myself, I think I realize that both of my parents are just extremely mentally ill and incapable of loving anyone, including themselves.
Since it seems to have widened a bit, a family torn apart. Based on an aunt and her niece. Aunt starts signs of dementia at a relatively young age, is moved into an assisted living home. Niece, who bounces around jobs, gets hierarchs to go visit her about once a week, take her out to the mall or a walk in the park, whatever. Paid handsomely. We get an alert that aunt has a check bounce from her account that should have $5,000 in it. Niece has drained the account. Proven beyond a doubt, with receipts. Niece would take aunt to aunt's bank machine every Friday and withdraw $200, then fill her car with gas. Aunt can't drive, and charge us hours when she clearly didn't spend hours with aunt, charged us claiming she took aunt to appointments. There was no appointment. We can actually call the doctor FYI. The family rift. For some bizarre reason niece's family took her side.
A little different. I was disowned. But I deserved it. I was an addict and a mess for a long time. My mom couldn't keep bailing me out of trouble and watch me self-destruct anymore. I wasn't living at home. She came to see me one last time to tell me she was done, not to contact her. She would no longer have anything to do with me. She was in pieces. I can't imagine how hard it must have been for her. But it was the best thing she ever did for me. Once she cut me off, my rock bottom came hard and fast. After a little while of living on the streets and my addiction consuming me, I made my way to a detox center, got a few days clean under my belt and never looked back. That was almost 15 years ago. After I was clean a little while, I contacted my mom, and little by little we built relationship again, and now we're really close. I am forever grateful to my mom for letting me fall and letting me back into her life.
I am not sure if this counts. I didn't disown him, but I went through a dissociative episode after some really intense trauma, and I honestly couldn't feel any attachment and parental love that I had for my son. I tried not to show it, and behave as normally as possible because he was a child at the time and couldn't possibly understand what I was going through. It was pretty disturbing to not be able to feel any sense of bond with him. I eventually got better, but I definitely did not feel what I or most people would call love for him.
Do adopted kids count? We adopted a 3-year-old from foster care. Cutest, sweetest kid. He had a few issues, but we mostly figured it was because of his history. The issues escalated quickly. When he was 7, he hit our dog with a golf club. We had to keep him away from our dog and our cat. The cat disappeared. We assumed she got out and ran away. Found out years later that he killed it and threw it in the woods. The last straw was when he burned our home down. We sent him to a residential treatment center where he stayed for 2 years. During that time, he molested a roommate and became extremely violent. The insurance company told us that they wouldn't pay anymore and we'd either have to pay for him out of pocket, $40,000 a month, or bring him home. We have younger children and it wouldn't be safe. We ended up telling the state we wouldn't bring him home. So now we have a verified abuse report against us because we wouldn't bring him back, even though the therapists agreed with our decision. I don't love him. I wish the best for him, but I don't feel anything toward him.
I've disowned one of my siblings, still have 5 other siblings. My sister is just a horrible person. She's the youngest of the 7, and she's been rotten since she was a teenager. She is much younger than the rest of us, so while the other 6 grew up together, she was almost like an only child. She treats everybody in her life like they're here to serve her needs. Some of the things she's put our mother through are truly horrible. I wouldn't give a shit if she disappeared forever.
I have disowned my oldest son. He molested my daughter, has been diagnosed as a sociopath, and we have restraining orders against him. It isn't fun and I never thought I would be that parent.
I asked my biological father at 28 why he never tried to see me after he and my mom got a divorce. He said he never wanted to try for any custody arrangement because that meant he would have to pay child support. So the fear of child support led him to stop talking to his 9-year-old. He's currently doing the same thing to my 2 younger half-sisters. Some people just really shouldn't be parents.
As Jehovah's Witnesses, my parents disowned my siblings and I several times since I was in my late teens. One of the JW rules is that you do not associate with others who know the truth but refuse to follow it, including family, and parents are encouraged to disown any children who have left the religion. The first time was when I was 19. It upset me, I was heartbroken, and eventually they changed their minds only to do it again a couple years later, and so on until I stopped caring and no longer attempt to be a part of their lives at all.
Not my story, but in a similar thread to this one, asking parents about when they realized they raised a monster, someone linked to this post https://www.reddit.com/r/off-me-/1jad/_am_not_proud_my_son/TL, doctor of that post. The son was a dipshit as a teen but took it way further by eventually raping his own mother, who committed suicide a year after.
Not the parent, but my mom ceased all contact with my much older half-brother from a different dad. He was a violent, angry addict, would steal from and beat up my grandparents and my mom. She finally had enough. He died this year and it's the first time my mom had seen him since she cut him off 15-ish years ago. I now have my own kids and I've always supported my mom's decision. That said, I feel so sorry for her, more so than when I was just her kid. I can't imagine ever reaching that point with my kids and I'm sure she never did either.
Not a parent, but my parents stopped loving me the moment I was disfellowshipped as a Jehovah's Witness, and I was promptly kicked out. I knew nothing of how to live on my own at the time, but I had a decent job and survived. My brother stopped associating with them 2 years later and lives with me, and they since moved away, 1,500 miles away to be exact. It's easier to tell people I am orphan or that I do not have parents, cause it's hard to explain how they would stop loving or want to associate with their own son over some stupid cult rules.
I hope my mom answers this one.
I disowned a family member, not a child though. We were very close, until he ended up being caught in a pedo sting. Then I turned my back and haven't looked back. I have a sister the age of the girl he was supposed to meet. I can't associate with scum like that. FYI, according to my sister, nothing was ever done to her.
I have been legally disowned by my father. When I was 11, my mum was diagnosed with terminal cancer. This was her second diagnosis in around 4 years. Obviously she recovered the first time after intense surgery and a lot of chemo, and he did not want to look after her like he did before. He also had a new GF and her family to look after apparently, and he had no issues leaving us. When my mum passed away when I was 14, my brother, grandmother, him and I met up to discuss who I was going to live with. The plan was my brother and his family. Father was never considered, and he showed up and declared that he was in the process of going to court to legally emancipate himself from me. He went out of his way to legally declare that I was no longer his child. Just so that my brother, 22 with a wife and 2 young children already struggling on 1 paycheck, couldn't seek child support. Needless to say it stung coming only days after my mother's funeral.
My biological father divorced my mom and also his 3 kids, basically bouncing out of our lives and making it clear he wanted next to nothing to do with any of us when he left. Many years later, at my older sister's funeral, that he had the fucking gall to attend, I asked him why he did that. He said, "I thought it would be easier for everyone." He actually meant it was easier for him to run home to his wealthy family and enjoy a second adolescence while my single mother worked 2 jobs to feed 3 kids under 10 with 0 child support from him.
My mother simply didn't want kids but never bothered to prevent having all 3 of us to different men. She tried to have my dad put in jail for abuse. Meanwhile he was working 2 jobs to support us and would come home to a filthy house and my diaper completely loaded. She put all 3 of us in foster care and luckily my dad got me along with my other half-sister's dad got her, but the oldest of us spent 18 years of her life in foster care. I last saw my mother when I was 6 because she had seen that my dad was successful and wanted to use him for money. He brought me to a park to meet her and she blatantly ignored me and instead was all over my dad. He's a smart man and realized this, and that's the last time I ever saw her. She never sent 1 birthday card or ever paid a dime of child support to my dad. Because she didn't want kids and wouldn't take any steps to prevent it 3 separate times. Congrats Mom, you're the world's biggest POS.
Not me, but Friend wanted to move out and be independent, which was appropriate, because she was 22. Her parents wanted to keep her under their thumb, and told her she couldn't move out. A huge argument ensued. She grabbed all her stuff and left. And was promptly disowned by both parents. Makes sense, right?
I'd love to hear my mother's explanation, although she hasn't contacted me for over 20 years, so I know that's not going to happen. I think you're more likely to get responses from the kids.
My wife left me and took our son from me when he was 6 weeks old. I fought for over 5 years to see him, but in the end had to protect my own sanity. The feeling of that parental love turning into just a feeling of his existence is something you simply can't describe.
Greater than cliché, not me, but My mom got taken out of my grandparents' will, and she only got to know so because of her sister. Her side of the family has always been very conservative and rather communal, so till death do us apart is serious business with them. When she ran away for over a week without giving any notice, leaving me and my sister alone, only to come back with some stranger we couldn't tell anyone they were living with us, it was obvious things were about to get hairy. She divorced, and remarried in the span of about 6 months, trying to keep everyone in the family out of the loop. I wouldn't be surprised if someone learned about it through the invitation to the party. Cries and drama ensued that day. She wasn't invited to the Christmas family reunion, and she used me and my sister as bargaining chips. They took away from her anything that was still in their name. She moved away, and only recently has she been trying to connect back.
Child here, I have disowned my mother, seems a common theme here. She did everything from generally invading privacy to starving us. She even went so far as to orchestrate my rape and my immediate pregnancy from said because she wanted cute little grandkids and she didn't want to wait. I was 13. When we moved in with my grandmother, we didn't know how to use silverware. I didn't start brushing my teeth until I was 15 because we never knew. Really fucked up lady.
My dad disowned my brother because he serially molested me and raped me when I was little.
I went out with a woman who had a 22-year-old son that she disowned forever. She didn't like to talk about him at first, but one day she just told me that she caught him molesting his 8-year-old cousin when he was 20 years old. While the rest of the family was having dinner downstairs, including the 8-year-old's mother. I didn't ask anything more than that.
I disowned my stepmom for shooting my cats, killing them, and threatening to do the same to my dog. There are many more insane stories. Unfortunately, my dad doesn't understand. He has issues also.
Don't mind me, just looking for my dad.
I disowned a member of my family. He was a pedophile and a rapist, and I was one of his victims.
I'd love to read my dad's reply here. 10 years this Christmas since he disconnected both phones and moved house without telling me where or why. He cut off both of his adult children when my parents' divorce got finalized and never looked back. I wonder if we ever cross his mind.
My parents got divorced and my mother decided she didn't want to be a mother anymore, so she neglected my sibling and I and kicked us out of her house. Because the court system favors the mother, she got custody despite nobody asking us or looking too far into it, and my dad had to give her the house and child support. Despite this, she didn't do anything for us and we ended up living with him anyways, and she spent our child support on world travels and wouldn't ever buy us anything. She met a guy, sponsored him, he had a son and that became her son. I was now nothing to her. They divorced. He stole all her money and she ended up homeless until family took her in, and it's been shaky since. She went off the deep end about a year ago and I tried to get involved to help her, but she kept being demeaning and went crazy, got arrested and I cut off ties. She threatened to come shoot me and I called the police and even went to try and make a police report, but nobody would listen to me and the guy at the counter at the police station laughed at me. It was very bizarre.
Okay, so far everyone is disowning their parents, but no parents disowning, no longer loving their children. Interesting. Because it's a younger demographic, or do parents not want to talk about it?
I disown my grandparents on my dad's side. My dad's parents are both divorced and remarried to different people. His father is great, lovely guy and super helpful when we need it. His mother and her husband are a real piece of work. She moved to Spain when I was maybe around 11-year-old. When I was 16-17, my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 stomach cancer. My grandfather and Nana were super helpful. Took him to appointments, picked my brother and I up from activities, generally being a great help in a difficult time. My grandmother and her kind of a husband, however, flew back from Spain just to tell us that they will not be helping with anything. That she is mainly focused on her knee replacement surgery in Spain. So at that point I decided I wanted nothing to do with her. I haven't as much as spoken to her in over 6 years and have no intention of speaking to her again. She as good as disowned my father in his most difficult moments, and that cannot be forgiven. My father survived his cancer. He's healthy and happy now.
Since my mom doesn't have Reddit and I don't care if my sister does, I'll speak for her. My sister is the worst person I know. Worse than my ex-fiancé who cheated on me, lied to me, then tried to make it my fault because I'm in the Navy and across country. She's a drug addict, narcissistic, drunk, and abusive. The worst traits of our abusive ex-stepfather. She may or may not be carrying on the tradition in my family of teenage pregnancy. No one in my family talks to her, so I can't confirm it, but I don't doubt it. She blames my mother for everything bad that had happened to her. Claims I molested when we were 9 or 10. Claims I planned a sexual assault that happened to her. Etc. 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 She cannot be any more different from me and my siblings, and cannot stand that me and my brother are no longer traumatized by our childhood. She has blocked 90% of my family and no one misses her.